Montana Territory, August 1879. The sun was just tipping past its highest point when they dragged her into the center of Dry Willow and tied her to the post outside the saloon. Rainie Talbot's wrists burned against the coarse rope, her arms pulled tight behind her. Dust clung to the sweat on her neck, and her cheeks stung from where the sheriff's deputy had backhanded her. She stood alone, her chin lifted despite the blood at the corner of her mouth, in front of a crowd that did not bother hiding their disgust. "She stole from Mrs. Larimore's dry goods," someone shouted. "Caught red-handed," they said. Rainie didn't speak. She had already tried. When she told the sheriff she had not taken anything, he told her to save her breath. When she tried again, when she begged him to look in her satchel so she could prove it was hers, he had grabbed her by the collar and told her to shut her mouth. No one in Dry Willow wanted to hear a word from a woman who rode in alone. No husband, no family, no land to her name. She blinked against the sweat trickling into her eyes. Her knees ached, her pride more so. The post stood in the middle of the street, meant for drunks and troublemakers. But this was more than punishment. This was humiliation. "Leave her there till sundown," the sheriff had said. "Let her think on what she's done." Rainie's jaw clenched as she shifted her weight, trying to ease the strain on her shoulders. The townsfolk had gone back to their errands, mostly, though a few still lingered nearby to watch. She was trying not to cry when the slow clop of hooves cut through the murmurs. He rode in from the west, where the sun burned low behind the mountains. A tall man, broad-shouldered, with a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. His coat was worn but clean. His horse was black and lean, its hooves quiet on the dirt road. He dismounted without a word, tied the reins to a hitch post, and walked straight toward her. Rainie squinted up at him. "I don't need your pity," she said, voice raw. The man didn't answer. He stepped behind her, reached into his coat, and pulled out a small knife. She tensed, but she didn't flinch. With 2 quick passes of the blade, the ropes fell away. Rainie staggered forward, catching herself with one hand on the post. Her shoulders screamed. She turned to face him. "You planning to get yourself strung up next?" she asked, throat tight. The man looked at her then. His eyes were dark, steady. "No," he said. "I just do not like lies." "What does that mean?" He did not answer. Instead, he held out a canteen. She hesitated, then took it. The water was warm but clean. She drank slow, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Thank you," she said. "You are welcome." He turned to leave. "Wait," Rainie said. "Why did you help me?" He looked back. "Because you didn't take anything." Her eyes narrowed. "You seem awfully sure." "I watched you. From the alley. Before they grabbed you." Rainie stared at him. "Who are you?" He hesitated a second, then said, "Yates Ellery." She nodded once. "Rainie Talbot." He gave a small nod in return. "You got someplace to go?" Rainie looked out at the dry hills beyond town. "Not anymore." Yates studied her for a moment. "Come on," he said. "You need out of this place." She followed him. Not because she trusted him, but because she had no other choice. They rode out of Dry Willow 10 minutes later, her on the back of his horse, her satchel still slung across her chest. She kept her hands on the saddle, not touching him, not speaking. Her heart still thrummed with the weight of what had just happened, the shame, the fury. He did not ask questions. He did not offer comfort. He just rode. They made camp by a creek nestled in the cottonwoods, a half-day's ride east. Yates built a fire with practiced hands. Rainie sat across from him, her arms wrapped around her knees. "You really saw I didn't take anything?" she asked finally. He nodded. "You were picking up a tin of tobacco. Dropped it when they grabbed you." She let out a shaky breath. "They did not even check. Just decided I looked the part. They were looking for someone to blame." Rainie looked into the fire. "I came out here thinking I could start over. My brother died last spring. I was trying to sell what was left of our land in Missouri. Thought maybe I could find work. Be useful." "You ride alone?" She nodded. "Always have." He nodded once. "You're strong. That's rare." She looked at him. "Why are you out here?" Yates's gaze stayed on the flames. "Looking for quiet. Found too much of it. They sat in silence again. The fire cracked. Crickets started up in the brush. After a while, Rainie unrolled her blanket and lay back, watching the stars. She did not sleep easy. Her muscles were sore, her wrists raw. But sometime after midnight, she opened her eyes and saw Yates still sitting upright, close to the fire, watching the dark. He was not a man who spoke much, but she felt safer knowing he was there. The next morning, he handed her half a biscuit and a strip of jerky. "We should move early," he said. "If they come looking, we'll be gone." They rode side by side that day. Rainie asked him where he was headed, and he said he had a cabin near the Bitterroot Range. She asked him if he lived alone, and he nodded. "Seems we are both used to that," she said. He glanced at her. "It does." Later, when they stopped to rest the horse, she sat on a flat rock and pulled her boots off to rub at a blister. Yates crouched beside her without a word, took her foot gently, and tore a strip from the hem of his shirt. He wrapped it around her heel, careful not to press too hard. She watched him. "Thank you." He met her eyes. "You should not have been out there alone." "I've been alone a long time." He nodded. "So have I." The quiet between them started to feel less heavy. By the time they reached the edge of the Bitterroots 3 days later, Rainie had learned that Yates had once worked cattle in Wyoming, that he had lost his younger brother in a rail accident, that he did not believe in God but still carried the worn leather Bible his mother gave him. She told him about the Missouri floods, the debts her father left behind, the way her neighbors turned cold after her brother passed. They did not speak of feelings, but he handed her his coat when it rained, and she made coffee for them both each morning, even when the beans were running low. The days passed steady. The nights, quieter than anything either of them had known in years. And somewhere between the silence and the firelight, Rainie's heart started to beat different when he looked at her. The way he watched her, careful and kind. The way he never asked her to be anything but what she was. She caught him staring once when she was brushing her hair out beside the creek. He did not look away, and she did not want him to. They were not strangers anymore. Not quite. Still, nothing was said. Until the night she tripped on a loose stone outside the cabin and he caught her before she fell. His arms wrapped around her waist, her hands landing against his chest. Their eyes met. Rainie's breath caught. "Yates." He leaned in, slow, giving her time to pull back. She didn't. His lips were warm, firm against hers, and her fingers curled into his shirt. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead to his. "I have not had anyone," she whispered. "Not since ever." "Me neither," he said. "Not really." Then he kissed her again, and this time they did not stop. Rain came soft the next morning, soaking the moss along the cabin's north side and turning the dirt path into a ribbon of mud. Inside, the fire burned low, the room quiet except for the gentle hiss of rain against the roof shakes. Rainie stood barefoot near the hearth, pulling her damp hair into a rough braid. Yates moved behind her, setting down a tin plate with the last of the beans and a wedge of cornbread. She nodded her thanks, her eyes still trained on the window. "You keep looking west," he said, settling across from her on the floor. "They'll wonder where I went," she said. "They might come looking. Not this far. Not unless they're real set on it." She let the silence stretch before she answered. "One of them might be." Yates chewed his bite slowly, then wiped his fingers on his trouser leg. "Who?" Rainie leaned her elbow on the windowsill. "Deputy Cale. He was sweet on me for a time. Changed his mind when I wouldn't let him in the house." Yates's brow tightened. "He the one who struck you?" She nodded once. He didn't comment on it, only reached for his coat and stood. "I'll take a look around, make sure no tracks lead up here." She turned from the window. "If they do come, I don't want you caught up in it." "You're not sending me off, Rainie?" "I'm not," she said. "But I've had folks turn cold just for standing near me." "I don't want that for you." His hand rested on the doorframe. "Let M turn. I'll still be standing." The door shut behind him and Rainie sat at the table, the cornbread untouched. The morning felt heavier than the others had. Not because of fear. Because of how quickly something good could be ruined by the people who refused to believe it belonged to someone like her. Yates returned near midday, his coat dotted with pine needles and his boots thick with mud. Tracks? None old enough to fret over. But the trail from town's catching water. That'll hide anything recent. Rainie stood. Then maybe we've bought ourselves a few days. Longer if we want it. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing the front of his shirt. Do you? He looked down at her, quiet a moment. I haven't wanted anything in a long time. But I do now. The wind pressed against the cabin walls. Rainie leaned her forehead to his chest and closed her eyes. The steady beat of his heart was the first thing that had felt certain in weeks. Later, she helped him patch the roof on the far side where a seam had started to leak. She worked beside him without complaint, her hands raw from hauling shingles, her shirt clinging to her back from the climb. He didn't try to stop her or offer to take over. He just passed her the tools and steadied the ladder when she came down. That night, they sat on the cabin porch, their boots resting in the puddles below the steps. The air smelled of wet pine and wood smoke. Rainie traced her finger along the rim of a tin cup. I used to think I'd marry a man who ran a store. Someone clean and polite. Do I seem clean and polite to you? Yates asked, his tone even. No, she said, glancing at him. You seem like someone who's seen hard things and didn't let it split him in two. He looked out at the trees. I've come close. She leaned her shoulder against his. Me too. They stayed like that until the moon rose high, casting light across the porch. Neither of them said much after that. They didn't need to. In the days that followed, the rhythm between them settled into something unspoken but sure. Rainie mended a tear in Yates's only other shirt while he chopped wood. He built a pen behind the cabin, saying nothing of it, but she noticed the way he measured the posts as if picturing livestock they didn't yet own. One evening, while she was washing her hands in the creek, she turned to find him watching her from the bend in the path. He didn't look away. Neither did she. When she reached him, she said, You thinking something? He nodded. I think I'd like to build another room. One with light in the morning. Rainie folded her arms. That's a fine thought. I reckon it should be yours. The words settled between them. Not loud, not sudden. Just true. She didn't answer right away, only touched his hand and held it. That night, she slipped her arm around his waist while he stirred the soup. He covered her hand with his. They didn't speak of love. They didn't have to. It showed in the way he carried water for her before she asked and how she laid his boots near the fire without a word. The world outside the trees still bore its teeth. But in that cabin, something lasting had begun. Not built in haste. Not taken by force. But chosen slowly until it felt like it had always been waiting for them. Yates stood on the ridge above the cabin, arms crossed, watching the smoke curl from its chimney. The sky stretched wide and pale above the bitterroots, with a thin band of cloud gathering along the horizon. He listened to the hush of wind through the pines and the distant knock of a woodpecker, then turned when he heard her footsteps behind him. Rainie climbed the slope steady, her skirt hitched up past her boots and a small burlap sack looped over her shoulder. You didn't say where you were headed, he said. I went west a mile or so, found wild currants near the bend. Thought we could make something sweet. He took the sack from her hand and peered inside. You pick careful. Rainie wiped a damp strand of hair from her brow. My mama used to say the birds always know the best ones. You watch where they land and you're halfway there. He looked at her then, the way her face lit when she spoke of something remembered. You get that from her? She tilted her head. The watching? Maybe. The patience, not so much. Yates smiled faintly but said nothing. They walked down the slope together, side by side, boots crunching over pine needles and dry twigs. Back at the cabin, Rainie rinsed the berries in a basin while Yates split kindling on the chopping stump. The rhythm of the day fell into place quiet and sure, like it had been theirs a long while. Inside, she stirred flour and lard into a rough dough, her hands dusted white. He came in and leaned against the doorframe. You ever think about putting in a stove? She asked, not looking up. I have. Could trade for one come fall. Rainie pinched the dough between her fingers. You'd trade something you need for it? I'd trade something worth it. She paused, then turned to face him fully. Yates, I don't expect you to change how you live just because I'm here. Rainie, he said, stepping closer, I don't call it changing. I call it building. She held his gaze a moment, then nodded once. All right. The berry cakes turned out crisp at the edges, soft in the middle, the scent of them filling the cabin as dusk fell. They ate by lantern light, the table between them scuffed from years of use. Rainie reached across once, brushed a crumb from his beard with the back of her finger. He caught her hand and held it there a beat longer than needed. Afterward, she filled the basin again and brought it outside beneath the stars. He followed, carrying the tin plates. They knelt beside one another, sleeves rolled, hands in the same cold water. "I used to think I'd end up in Kansas," she said quietly. "Married to some man who never left his county, raising 5 children in a house with thin walls and a leaky roof. You sound like you don't miss it." "I don't. Not the life that would have been handed to me." Yates scrubbed the tin with a cloth. "You ever want children?" She looked out toward the dark line of trees. "Yes. But not if it meant having to disappear inside someone else's life to get them." He nodded once, slow. "I wouldn't want that for you either." She turned to him. "And you?" "I think about it sometimes. Not the way people usually do. Not a name to carry on, not a legacy. Just someone to raise with care. Teach them how to be decent. Let them grow into their own self." Rainie leaned her shoulder against his. "I think you'd be good at that." He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "We could build something slow. Doesn't have to be all at once." She reached down, brushed her fingers along his. "I'd like that." The moon rose higher, casting pale light across the clearing. They sat silent a while, the wash basin between them, hands clean and warm from the water. The next morning, Yates saddled the horse early and packed a sack with dried meat and a coil of rope. Rainie stepped out, drying her hands on a cloth. "You riding out?" "Only to the Eastridge. There's a family up there, Merricks. They've got a young boy. I helped them fence a pasture 2 winters ago. They might have hens to sell." Rainie crossed her arms, the morning air still sharp. "You think we're ready for hens?" "I think we're ready to start thinking about them." She gave a small nod. "All right then. I'll keep the fire going." He mounted and looked down at her. "You need anything?" She shook her head. "Just come back." Yates didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "I will." She watched him ride off, the pine boughs swallowing him slow. Then she turned back to the cabin and began sweeping the floor, humming low under her breath. By the time he returned that evening, the sky had turned gold and the smell of stew met him before he reached the door. Rainie stepped out when she heard the hooves, her hands dusted with flour again. Yates lifted a burlap sack from the saddle and set it on the porch. 2 hens, 1 black, 1 red, and a small crate of seed. She opened the sack, peered inside. "They've got good eyes," she said. "These birds'll lay well." He leaned against the porch rail. "You sound sure. When you've been hungry, you learn what to look for." Yates nodded. "Then I'll believe you." They didn't say anything else. They didn't need to. The birds clucked soft in the sack and the stew smoked gentle through the open window. Rainie took his hand and together they stepped inside. Outside, the mountains held the last of the light. Inside, the life they were shaping began to settle in, quiet and solid as the beams above their heads. Yates pulled the last of the fence wire taut, the sun pressing low across the backs of his shoulders. Rainie knelt nearby, steadying the post while he fastened the loop. Her sleeves were rolled high, her palms dirt-streaked. When he stood, she eased back on her heels, brushing her hand across her temple. "That's the last of it," she said. He nodded, coiling the slack wire. "Should keep the hens from wandering." She rose slowly, stretching one arm behind her back. "I never thought I'd help build a pen in the middle of Montana. You regret it?" She looked at him, the corner of her mouth pulling just enough to answer. No. They walked back toward the cabin, the air cooling quick now that the sun had dipped behind the ridge. A pair of swallows darted overhead, wings sharp against the fading sky. Rainie stopped short when she reached the porch, eyeing the corner of the step. "Prince," she murmured, crouching low. Yates stepped beside her. The boot marks were faint but fresh, pressed into the patch of damp earth where the eaves dripped from the morning's thaw. "Too small for mine," he said. "And they weren't here this morning." He straightened, scanning the tree line. Could have been someone passing through. She looked toward the trail. Or someone looking. That night, they kept the lantern low and the rifle propped just inside the door. Rainie sat near the hearth, mending a tear in the curtain with small, careful stitches. Yates watched her a moment, then crouched to toss another log on the fire. You ever hunted? He asked. Not animals, she said. But I've hit a man before. He waited. I was 16. He came drunk through our yard and tried the door. My brother was off with the wagon. I had a hammer in my hand from fixing the coop. I didn't think. Just swung. Did he come back? No. He left blood all over the step, though. Yates leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. You'd do it again if you had to. I would. The next morning, Yates left at first light to check the trail for signs. Rainie stayed behind, splitting kindling and boiling water for washing. She kept the rifle leaned near the door. The hens clucked softly beneath the lean-to, unbothered. When he returned, his coat carried the scent of pine sap and horse sweat. He set his hat on the peg and glanced at her. Found ash from a fire near the ridge. Cold, but not more than 2 nights. Camped out, maybe watching. That evening, they ate in quiet, the tension settling close again. After the dishes were rinsed, Rainie stepped outside, wrapping her shawl tight. Yates joined her a moment later, his hands deep in his pockets. Was there anyone back in Dry Willow you think would follow this far? He asked. Maybe one. Cale? She didn't answer right away. He used to talk like a man who didn't expect to be told no. And when I told him no, he changed. Got quieter. Meaner. Yates looked out into the dark. If he comes, we'll be ready. I don't want him near this place. It's the first one that's felt. She didn't finish. He reached for her hand. We'll keep it safe. The next week passed without sign. They dug a small garden bed near the creek's edge, turned soil with a rusted spade Yates had traded for 2 winters ago. Rainie planted onions and late cabbage, fingers working steady in the dirt. She hummed under her breath, low and tuneless. When she stood to stretch her back, Yates offered her the tin cup without needing to ask. Each night, they sat on the porch and listened to the frogs calling from the shallows. Each morning, she rose before him and boiled water for coffee, the two of them moving around each other with the ease of people who had long since stopped guessing. One evening, Rainie came in from the coop with her hands full of kindling and paused in the doorway. Yates was standing by the table, smoothing his hand over a folded piece of paper. She stepped closer. What's that? He held it out. Letter from a man I knew in Cody. Says a blacksmith there's looking for someone to help run his shop. Honest work. Enough pay to bring in lumber for a second room. Rainie traced the edge of the page with her thumb. You thinking of going? Not alone. She looked up. You want me to come? I want you to decide if you'd rather stay here or build something in town. A place that's ours from the start. She folded the paper slowly. I've spent most of my life being told where to be. I'd like it to be my choice now. Then we wait. She leaned into him, her head resting just below his collar. I'm not asking for a full life all at once. Just one that's mine. That's all I'm offering. Outside, the wind swept low through the grass, bending it soft. Inside, the fire burned steady, casting gold across the worn floorboards, and the choice that lay ahead felt less like a fork in the road and more like a path they'd walk together, wherever it led. The wagon creaked under its load as it rolled along the edge of the bluff. The mountains softened behind spring mist. Rainie sat beside Yates on the bench seat, her hands wrapped around the reins, though he'd offered more than once to take them. She kept her eyes steady on the trail ahead, lips pressed into a line of quiet thought. They'd left the cabin 2 days before, the hens secured with a neighbor Yates trusted, the garden mulched and weeded, the tools hung in the shed with care. Rainie had packed slowly, folding each apron, each shawl as if layering more than fabric. When Yates asked if she was certain, she hadn't answered. She'd only laced her boots tighter. Cody's not far now, he said, his voice low beneath the breeze. She nodded. Feels farther than it is. I can still turn us around. I don't want to turn back, she said. I just want to walk into it with my eyes open. He tilted his head, studying her. You always do. The blacksmith shop stood on the edge of town, its forge chimney already puffing smoke when they arrived. Rainie waited with the wagon while Yates stepped inside. She watched the townsfolk pass slowly, a woman lifting her skirts through the mud, two boys racing between barrels. No one spared her a second glance. When Yates returned, his shirt collar damp with sweat, he said nothing at first. Then he'll take me on. Says I'll earn fare if I stay through the winter. Rainie studied his face. Do you want it? I want what it gives us. She nodded once. Then we make it ours. They found a narrow house tucked near the livery, its cedar siding faded but sound. The roof bowed slightly and the back door hung a little loose, but the porch caught morning light and the floor held firm beneath their steps. Rainie walked through each room slowly, brushing her fingers across the windowsills and testing each shutter. When she returned to the front room, Yates was standing by the hearth, waiting. I can fix the door, he said. She stepped close, her coat still buttoned against the wind. I can make it warm. They moved in before the week was out. Rainie whitewashed the kitchen walls and scrubbed the stone floor until her knuckles split. Yates built shelving from salvaged pine and hung a coat hook beside the door. He left for the forge each morning before the sun reached the windows, and she watched his silhouette fade down the road with the same quiet certainty each day. By midsummer, the house no longer felt borrowed. Rainie had stitched new curtains from flour sacks, and a basin of thyme and marjoram grew green on the back sill. Yates came home each night with calloused palms and ash along his sleeves, setting his boots by the door without a word. She met him with a towel and a basin, and he never asked her to stop. One evening, she set a kettle to boil and poured him a cup before he even sat down. I saw a notice posted today, she said, settling across from him. The town's looking for someone to teach letters to children too young for the schoolhouse. He looked up. You thinking of it? I'm thinking I know how to read, and I've got the time. You'd be good at it. She folded her hands around the cup. Then I'll try. Autumn came slow, gold in the trees and smoke on the air. Rainie's afternoons filled with chalk and slates, the voices of children echoing in the small borrowed room behind the church. She came home each evening with her hair mussed and her fingers chalk-dusted, and Yates would lift his brow and ask, "Survive it?" And she'd nod and say, "Barely," and then they'd eat together in the quiet they both understood. One night, long after the fire had gone to embers, she lay beside him, her hand resting on his chest. "I keep waiting for it to fall apart," she said softly. "It won't. You don't know that." "I know you," he said. "And I know me. That's enough." She drew in a breath, slow and unhurried. "Then I'll believe it." That winter, they weathered the heaviest snow Cody had seen in 10 years. Yates dug paths with a borrowed spade, and Rainie lined the windows with wool scraps to keep the draft out. They didn't speak of hardship. They didn't need to. They moved around each other with the ease of people who had learned that love wasn't a thing shouted, it was a bowl of hot stew, a mended scarf, a shoulder offered without asking. One morning in early spring, Rainie stood at the back door, her hand resting over her stomach. Yates came in, boots damp from the thaw, and paused when he saw her. She turned to face him. "I think we'll need a cradle come fall." He crossed the room in 2 steps and took her hand, pressing it to his lips. He didn't ask if she was certain. He didn't speak at all. He just held her, silent and still, until the kettle hissed and she pulled back to tend it. They built a cradle together by midsummer, rough-hewn pine smoothed with care. Rainie stitched a quilt from old shirts and scraps of muslin, and Yates carved a small bird into each corner of the frame. The town women brought preserves and knitted socks, and the blacksmith gave Yates 3 days' leave without asking why. The baby came on a cold October morning, small and red-cheeked, with a quiet cry that settled quick. They named her Mabel, after Rainie's mother, and wrapped her in a blanket so soft it felt like breath. Yates held her with the same hands that had bent iron and lifted stones, now cradling something lighter and more lasting. Rainie watched them from the bed, her face pale, her eyes full. "You built this life," he said. She shook her head. "We did." The days that followed were slow and full. The cradle creaked gently beside the hearth, and Rainie moved through the house with a softness that came from knowing she belonged. Yates rose early and came home without fail. He tended the fire, watched Mabel sleep, and never once reached for anything but her hand come nightfall. Years passed, and the house grew into itself. Rainie taught reading still, though fewer days each week. Yates took on an apprentice at the forge, a quiet boy with quick hands and good manners. Mabel grew tall, with her father's calm and her mother's fire. One evening after supper, they sat on the porch while Mabel braided wildflowers into the hem of her apron. Rainie leaned against Yates, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you ever miss the quiet?" she asked. He looked out at the street, where a dog barked and 2 children chased a hoop. "No," she smiled. "Me neither." He pressed a kiss to her temple and laced their fingers together. The wind rustled the cottonwoods beyond the fence and the lamps in the windows glowed warm. They stayed there until the stars came out, a family built from patience and choosing, their lives woven together not by chance, but by every quiet, steady moment that had come before.